everyone. Welcome to the Art of Estate Planning's Live, Facebook Live for the 11th of May. Thank you everybody for your patience for our jump start just before. Nothing like a few tech issues to get you excited about a Thursday. I'd like to take a moment to make sure that this time everyone can hear us and we're not on a loop. I know everybody's been having a few joining us along for the tech ride. So if you can please let us know in the comments if you can hear us nice and clearly. Today we're going to be talking about the tricks and traps of share discovery, transfers and sales. I was lucky enough to be introduced to Jono through some of our legal fraternity, and we had a really, really great connection about our passion for helping people locate things in a difficult time. And when we had a quick pull out at the last minute for a presenter, Jono stepped up and helped us out. So thanks, Jono, for joining us. Before we get into some of the heavy stuff, I want to acknowledge that we're hosting the training from the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people, and I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands on which each of you are living, learning and working from today. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. So again, thank you so much for joining us, everyone. And Jono, I really, really appreciate, and I know Tara does, you coming on at short notice. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say today from a really practical perspective. And I know that we've got a lot of people online as well that probably don't have a huge amount of experience in this particular part. So we're all here ready to learn when you're ready to hit us with it. So off you go.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Carrie, and members, and Tara as well. I really appreciate it. I never thought that deceased estate stockbroking was going to be a webinar topic, but I know after the pain that you go through trying to get it sorted that there's a reason so many people are keen to hear about it. Just quickly, I just need to go through a general advice warning. Everything is just under general advice banner, and so nothing's personal advice. So you need to take that into account with anything that we say.
Classic legal disclaimer, Jono. You're in with a group of lawyers and people in financial services, so
I'm in the right room for that. I'll just start by introducing myself and the business. We're independently owned. Pretty much everyone in that picture here is the business. So it's my beautiful partner, Selene, and my little son, Lumi, who is a big part of the reason I've got such big bags under my eyes at the moment. He's a beautiful little boy, but he's not sleeping the best. I've been working in the markets since like the middle of my teens, but professionally for nearly a decade and a half now. And I started off in wool and grains and then moved across to finances. And as you can probably tell from my country twang, I'm a country boy at heart. So I grew up in the wheat belt in New South Wales in a little country town called Temora. So shout out to any of the country kids listening. In 2016, I underwent my Lifeline counselling certification. So I became a crisis counsellor and jumped on the phones for Lifeline. And that was after losing one of my best friends to suicide. And the reason I put that in there is that was a big lever into where myself and my business has been shaped to today, and it's how I got funneled into this niche of deceased estate stockbroking. Because in my previous role, any of the tricky cases that would come through, particularly anything that was emotionally charged, they would transfer it to me, and so I just became the go-to deceased estate guy, which has flowed through to my business, which is now just ticked over 12 months. As a part of that, basically deciding to go down as a specialty deceased estate broker. It's not the easiest job in the world, as many of you would know. It's so many tips and traps. I think the name that you've picked for today's presentation is so perfect. So on the hunt to try and make that a little bit better, I've tried every major clearinghouse in Australia to locate the one that's got the best team for deceased estate. So it's not just me. A big part of it is my clearinghouse and the team that they've got in their deceased estates department. And I believe that's the reason that, we have such a good edge in the space, is that we can go on that extra step on those complex cases where other brokers, particularly maybe the registry's brokers, would hit a red flag and just cancel and they can't do it. So.
That's great, John. And that's one of the reasons for everyone listening, I actually wanted John to give us a brief about him, because I know that you're relatively new in small business, and we tend to sort of only work with people we know, like, and trust. And although I've had a really great chat with you, and I feel that where we are on the scheme of things is really aligned, I want to make sure that people know who you are as well, particularly because I think the service that you're offering is quite unique. And I want to make sure that anybody that has questions as a result of learning some more information on this, or learning what services you offer, has a touch point moving forward. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. I'll start with some of the traps, or maybe some of the main traps, because we could be here all day if we went through all the traps in the space. But the biggest trap is the registries themselves. And I mean this in no disrespect, but they're not the easiest to deal with. And I would say 2/3 of the times that you do deal with them, that they may mislead you into what action steps you need to take. So most of the cases that I adopt, they've began the process of either transferring or selling shares, dealt with the registries, and tied themselves into a bit of a knot with wrong paperwork and wrong actions that have taken. So something might be sitting on the desk for months and months in the give up pile, and then we'll inherit it from there. So there's 5 main registries in Australia. Depending on the share itself is where the registry that you'll have to deal with. And yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of the people listening know that is the number one trap. Very hard. Sometimes I feel like there's not much of a difference between dealing with Centrelink and dealing with the registries. It's the same, it's the same sort of traps there.
And so what you're saying here, Jono, is that dealing with these people, a lot of paperwork, a lot of sort of red tape sort of stuff. Is that what it is, or what do you find is the main issue?
I find the main issue is just there's no continuity. So I don't know exactly how they operate, but I assume it's a call center of relatively new people, maybe a high turnover. And so they're very confined within what information they have. And yeah, the biggest thing that I find with people who may try and do the process themselves, whether that's clients or solicitors, is that they'll ring the registries and they get a very confident person on the other end of the line to say, yep, do steps A, B, and C, and they'll go and take those steps, and they're just the wrong steps. The beauty of being a broker or using a deceased estate stockbroker is that they probably know what steps to take, and so they may coach the person at the registry on exactly what forms are needed or what process is to be done, because it can be a roadblock of 3 or 4 weeks by the time you download the forms that they've instructed, fill them out, get all the paperwork, send them off in the post, wait the couple of weeks for them to register it, and then they'll contact you to say, oh, sorry, we've got the wrong forms. So it can really slow things down.
Feel free to throw us some comments in the Facebook comments, because I think we often tend to use the art of estate planning as a bit of a vent about dealing with third parties. But to give you some personal experience with Computershare as an example, when my mum passed away, she was co-trustee of a family trust, and then I tried to update them to say that she'd passed away, and rather than simply then just following that process, they then actually took away the account details altogether and started funneling the money to unclaimed funds. So then we had to go through the unclaimed funds process, because who we were dealing with was not really helpful with what to do there. So I think that's actually probably quite a common thing that happens, is you get stuck in that cycle with the registries, and rather than having someone to manage that process for you, it just ends up being a lot more difficult. So had I met you, 4 years ago, Jono, we might have been having a very different conversation. So
yeah, and it is a fun fact that if a dividend goes unclaimed at the registries, then it's between 3 and 7 years, but it's somewhere around that timing that they then transfer it into a government trust, and it sits in the government trust in that unclaimed funds. So there would be millions and millions of dollars in there.
Absolutely. Sorry,
so
go ahead.
That's one of the main traps is the registries. That's normally where I find the roadblock from the get-go. The second is lost shares, and that's something that's really seems to be more evident now. I'm not exactly sure why, but a lot of the people coming to me are coming to me with lost shares, and that could be just some missing details, or it could be just exactly what we just said. Someone saying, I'm pretty sure they've got shares, but we just have no information on it. There's no information in the banks or in the post. Can you help us find them? And yeah, that comes from a range of different things, but client files not being in order, in most cases, no files at all, no dividend records in the bank. So a number of years back, the registries stopped sending out checks. And in that process, they would have sent a mail out where you can update your banking details. People may have moved address or just ignored the instruction. And so there's unpaid dividends sitting there, accumulating over years. Moving address is a big one. Like people who move overseas or move a lot around the country, they will quite often move so much that the registry doesn't keep update of their address. And that's where we find these lost shares happen, is that maybe the shares change name, maybe they do a share split or a share swap, and they don't get any of these updates in the mail. So when the estate's trying to gather all their documents, they just don't have them because they've maybe moved 3 or 4 times and they've got no recent mail about their holdings. And then the other thing that happens quite often is that you'll finalise the estate, and then you might notice some money goes into the bank account, or you get some documentation sent out about shares that you didn't know you had retrospectively.
Yeah, I think that's, again, a really, really common thing that we all experience from a practical perspective. And often we have situations where the person didn't have one of our fabulous financial advisors involved in the process, who are usually across those things. There's lots of files that we come across, or estates rather, that we come across that they didn't have someone managing that process. And so this is a really, really common trap, that we don't really have all the information to even know where to start to find things.
Yeah. And I'm sure you guys have been through it before. Like sometimes the loss doesn't have to be from ages ago. Quite often there may be a deceased estate, and in the process of transferring, the executor or beneficiary passes away, and so then it becomes a transfer on a transfer, sometimes then again on to another transfer. And so that period of multiple estates becomes very messy, and it's easy to misplace shares.
It's funny you say that, Jono. We're going to be speaking again about that particular topic, about multiple deaths, in the hot seat today, about the CGT effect on that.
Wow. Yes.
So just pinging for all our club members today that's going to be pretty exciting for us from a estate planning nerd perspective, but certainly it's a really complex thing for families when they're trying to deal with it from the estate administration perspective.
Super tricky. I've got one at the moment with a client, and it's the biggest line of inheritance I've ever dealt with, trying to get a cost-based analysis, because it was passed down about 4 or 5 times, these shares. So very, very tricky.
So that's something you do help with as well, is to go through that process of trying to reverse engineer that?
Yes. Yep.
Perfect.
It's not an easy one, but it is something that we definitely help with. And I most often align with financial planners on that, where the planner will reach out to get the help around that. And a lot of times it's about getting it as close as you can. And yeah, I don't know how you can get it closer, but we'll go with what's, the best guess, essentially.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's very easy. You can log in and get the whole history, and other times it's very, very difficult.
Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the really important things we're going to be talking about today, really, is that, no man is an island, or no person is an island. When it comes to stockbroking, similar to estate planning generally, really, that estate administration as well, that, you've got your lawyer, your financial planner, your stockbroker, your accountant as well for all these issues. So what we're trying to do is make the process easier for people that are coming to us for that help, and leaning on our friends that have more knowledge in certain areas than we do.
Definitely. I think the overarching issue is that the system's not perfect for what it is, and they've been trying to update it for a decade and a half now. And it's a big project. So we're kind of stuck in this archaic way of tracking and keeping track of our shareholdings.
Yeah.
The third trap is very similar to the one prior, is unpaid dividends. This one's huge, and we touched on it already. There's millions of dollars in unpaid div sitting at the registry. Once it sits at the registry long enough, it then gets moved to the government trusts. It's really, really easy to miss this one. A lot of people won't even look at the payments when they do share transfers or share sales, and so the registries they don't actively chase it up. So they'll send a mail out or two, but if that goes unnoticed, then yeah, it'll just sit there and accumulate and eventually get moved into that trust. So yeah, super easy one to miss. Even some brokers may miss this one. I've got a little example at the bottom here, which was just a recent one. At the time of sale, I logged in and checked the payments. So we do 2 checks, once when we do the share check, and then again at the time of sale to see if there's any actions to do. And this one's just a small shareholding, but it was at the time this read direct credit paid, so it looked like all boxes were ticked. But in that time, the estate bank account had been shut down, and it was about 2 weeks later that this was updated to rejected. So you can see how easy that is to miss. Check it at the time of sale and it says it's all good. Luckily, we sort of kept an eye on that trust account to see it come in, and it didn't end up coming in. So another process there.
Yeah. And that's something too, again, just to share experiences, because not everybody has I was going to say pleasure, but it's not really the pleasure sometimes of doing this. But, you know, when it comes to unclaimed funds, they're actually state by state. Is that correct? That you have to go, and each state has its own requirements about how to access those funds, any unpaid funds as well? Or are you talking about just unpaid dividends here?
In this case, unpaid dividends. So you'll do that through the registries. So there's no barrier there in terms of state or anything in that.
Yeah.
And there are a few things that sit under that registry as well that aren't shares. So the things like memberships, like I mentioned them from the country. So any of your wool memberships or your grain memberships will actually sit under there as well. So you can find some other unpaid funds in that search. But yeah, slightly different to that normal, lost super or lost fund search.
Okay, yeah, that's I didn't know that there was a whole different process for potentially unpaid dividends versus unclaimed monies, which is a state-by-state process. So that's really interesting.
And in that process that we spoke about before, where there's an estate event that turns into multiple estate events, that's where it gets tricky, because to go and check those dividends, you'd need to log into every single holding along the way and make sure that they've all been ticked off and paid out.
Yeah, wow. Yeah.
Tricky.
Look, this is why people like you exist, Jono, because that does not sound like my cup of tea.
Stockbrokers often ask me, like, why did you go down this niche? It's so tricky.
I think I can share the feeling of everyone is that while we curse about the small detail stuff, the result that we can give clients is absolutely unparalleled. The help we can give people and the sheer relief they get when we can do things like this to help them is you can't put a price on it, really.
Yeah, I find with lost shares in particular, regardless of the amount, the comment from the client eventually, once they get paid into the bank account and they can see the funds, it's almost like they've written it off. Like it's been lost for so long that they've written that money off. And so it's quite a shock for them to actually see it. So it's quite rewarding when you can do that. And sometimes it might be $1,500. But in some cases, we've had, $1 million worth of shares that were found that were just purely strung off from a beneficiary saying, I'm pretty sure that their deceased had shares, and they pushed it to get that search done.
Goodness me, I wish I had $1 million hiding somewhere, John.
It would be nice, wouldn't it? So I'll go through some of the tips, and then I'm sure there'll be some questions from you and any of the members. So the tips with the registries, it sounds awful to say it, so I don't mean it in any derogatory way, but when you do call them, assume that they're going to be wrong. So it's okay to question them. If it doesn't feel right, question them and maybe ask, or I've written here, and what I do often is I'll just hang up and call back in 15 minutes, and you'll get someone else. It'll be a whole different answer. Sometimes it'll be a much better answer. So consistency is not something you'll see at the registries. And for instance, when we do a blind share search, which I'll cover in a little bit, the information that we get is so varied from person to person at a registry, and also from registry to registry. So sometimes we'll get all of the information, which I don't think is exactly what they're meant to do. And sometimes you'll just get a little hint of information. So don't be afraid to ring multiple times. I know time is not something everyone has a lot of, but in this case, you'll probably save, sometimes weeks if you could just get the right person. One thing that I've discovered recently is that you can actually request to get the deceased estates team phone number. The wait times are always less. So just recently we had lots of dividends being paid. The wait time to ring the registry was like 20 to 40 minutes for about a month. But the deceased estate team I'd normally get onto within 10 or 15 minutes. So when you do get onto someone initially, get transferred to the deceased estate team, state who you are, and then I would ask for the number, and they'll quite often give you the number, so you can save a little bit of time there.
That sounds incredibly similar to the way that we have to deal with banks in deceased estates, is the multiple calling to make sure you get the right person. And then if they've got a deceased estates team, which most banks tend to have it these days, is finding the phone number or the email address. I know that there's often exchanges of emails for deceased estates teams and contact numbers for deceased estates teams for banks. So it's really interesting you say that, but it's very similar.
It is just shy of soul crushing when you wait 40 minutes to get onto someone and then you realize that you're going to have to hang up and go back again because they're not the right person. It's tricky, but it's just got to be done. I've got a little question there.
Yeah. Someone's saying here that they're dealing with the CMC. So Kimberly said dealing with the CMC markets at the moment and cannot get anyone to respond to me. Tried calling, email, post on their site. Any chance you're up for a sneaky tip?
And is that a fact-finding mission? You're trying to find some shares at CMC? Because there would definitely be some tricks there. I'll just wait for the response there and then I'll come back to that.
Yeah, and also because obviously there's a delay in the messages that come up. If we have to, Kimberly, John's going to be sharing his details at the end, so you can pick up the phone and give him a call. Can confirm he's lovely to speak to. So we'll see if that question comes through from Kelly, the extra comments.
I try my best, but CMC was one of the markets we tried as a clearer, and we do have to deal with them quite a bit. So there'll definitely be a way around it, but it is tricky. There's a particular places that are hard to get information from, and CMC and unfortunately CommSec sometimes is one as well.
Yeah, great.
But I'll see what the user says there, and I'll come back to that question. Back to the registries, if they give you a time frame. Trying to change the director, sorry. I can't see the second part of that. Could you read that out?
So Kimberly's asking again that she's trying to change the directorship for an SMSF after a death of the sole director.
Okay. Yeah, I would reach out to me on that one. We should be able to help. There might
be a couple of avenues, is that what you're saying, depending on what's going on?
Yeah, depending on the structure and what it is that the end game is, like what you're trying to get to, then there might be a better way for that one.
Yeah. So Kimberly, at the end, John's going to share his contact details, and you can reach out to him and he can give you a hand.
Happy to chat. Yeah, and just need to have a little bit more of a look at that one. With ETAs at the registries in particular, like they might say it'll be 24 hours. They might say it'll be a 7-day turnaround or a 2-week turnaround. Again, just back to that first line, just assume that that's wrong. If something's urgent, we'll ring them twice a day and we'll keep asking and keep putting some sort of pressure on there. The ETAs, I've never seen them to be correct, and they will very often forget a case. So for us, part of that calling every day is just to keep it active, because so many times if you just left it for the 7 days that you thought about, and maybe you've got 3 or 4 more cases across your desk and you forget about it, and it can sit there for months until you realize that you're still waiting on something. Quite often with deceased estates, they'll tell you that you can email the document in question. It's like 9 times out of 10, you'll email it, and then 2 or 3 weeks down the track, you'll get an email back saying that this needs to be posted. But sometimes it's just, is it? Oh, so frustrating. Yeah, I'll always be shocked on the phone if I'm speaking to them on the phone. They say, just email it back. I'm like, email, are you sure? Yep, we're sure. I was like, could you check that for me? Yep, no worries. They go away, they come back. Yep, email. And then 2 weeks later, you'll have a note saying this needs to be posted. Like, damn.
It's why my blanket rule is always to follow up something in writing, so that, when you get that sort of saying, hey, emailed, when you email it, say, I spoke to XYZ on this time, then they said I could email it. So
yeah, that won't.
passing along that
alter
feedback
them.
in real time.
The SRN and the HIN. So another thing is not really a registry fault, but just human error. It happens to all of us, but quite often you'll do that same process where you send the documents away. They take a couple of weeks to get there. They take a couple of weeks to process. And then the SRN number will be off by 1, or the share number will be off by 1. And so, yeah, very common mistake. It's human error. So the way that we get around that is that we always put it into whatever our main key document is. So for us, it's a spreadsheet. And then we copy and paste from that spreadsheet into every avenue. So we're into the registry. When we log on to the registry, any emails, any documents, they all get copy and pasted from that spreadsheet. So if you've logged in and it works, then you know that number works. So that copy and paste should carry around to all of those documents.
Just, Jono, just for the sake of sharing with those, I always like to make things what I call carry proof, which is better than saying idiot proof, because I'm one of those not very smart, bright people. We have a range of different people, from those that are just starting out to those that pretty much could write the book on estate planning, so to speak. What is an SRN or a HIN?
So the security reference number, SRN, it is an identifier for that shareholding. So it identifies your shareholding, and it's registered to the share itself and to your details. So it'll be your name, your address, and then the shareholding.
Mm-hmm.
And the HIN is very similar, but it's more like an online wallet, and that sits in the front of a broker. So if you were a client of mine, you would have a HIN that is it's listed from the ASX itself, but it's housed at JM Investments, and you can move that wherever you like. You can go to CMC or CommSec or any broker in Australia, and you can take that HIN, which is kind of like a online share wallet, with you. So they're basically the identification numbers that help you log into the registries, transfer shares, sell shares, that sort of thing.
Great. I think we're going to be talking about later on even the process of trying to get those details when you don't have them again, because it's quite often we don't, that someone passes away, they don't just have a list of those numbers sitting around somewhere. That we're not all of our clients, or deceased estates rather, have a stockbroker or a financial planner on board that has those details.
Yep. It can be something that's just super easy to set up as well. Like in the planning stage, if someone does have a whole bunch of shareholdings, in that planning stage, you can maybe encourage them to move that over to a HIN. Doesn't cost anything. There's no fee. It means that all their shareholdings are in that one wallet. And so it's finding it on the back end of that is going to be so much easier. And you'll also have, even if you can't look up the share directly, you'll be able to look up the HIN and see who the broker was. And in that case, Carrie, you could then call me at JM Investments and say, we've got this, send me through the documents, and we can give you a printout of every shareholding, because they'll all be on our system. So it can make things easier in the back end.
That's really interesting to know that you can kind of put them all in that one electronic wallet. And also, for the sake of estate planning purposes, for the legal nerds in here, looking at, recording any details about how to get that number through your letter of wishes. So
yeah. It is safer, I think it's safer as well to be sitting at a HIN in terms of identity theft and fraud and those sorts of things, because you do have that extra step of protection. So each broker will have their own security measures that they can take to identify that it's the person making the call to buy or sell the shares. So there's like one extra step in identifying it being the right person. So
great.
And then in the share discovery stage, we touched on it there, but just some tips around that. It is basically look for any clues, whether that's half a dividend statement, anything in the mail. Generally speaking, registries, they're not friendly with trees. They like wasting paper, and so they'll send a lot of stuff. So if the person's moved a lot, then maybe that won't be the case, but usually the first clue will come from somewhere in the mail. And dividend checks, they don't send dividend checks anymore. So hopefully the person has updated their bank details, and somewhere along the line you might be able to see a dividend that's hit the bank account, and that can be just the first step in finding something. But to sell or transfer the shares, we need that SRN or HIN that we spoke about before. We need a registered address. So if we can't find one of those two things, then maybe we'll get a list of all the addresses, and we can then go and do the search from there. And then once we've found them, we need the shares to be tradable. So if they're a part of an employment agreement, then maybe there's an extra step in that process where we need to get those transferred into ordinary shares so that they can be sold in the estate. So the easier search is when we know the shares, we know that they exist, but we just don't have that reference number. That's what we call a 12A SRN search. It's really easy. Essentially, you need to open an account in the estate's name, and then we can perform the search. To open an account, we do need a probate, or if it's a small estate, then we'll do the small estate indemnity. But in that asset discovery stage, sometimes in this blind search, if we did a blind search, in the asset discovery stage, we may need to go for the best guess again, because you can't do the 12A without a probate, and you can't open the account without a probate. So sometimes we need to do the blind search, get the rough details, apply for probate with that, and then once probate comes in and we can set the account up, then we can continue the search, the finalization of the search, and get the exact numbers, the shares and the values. And the blind search is exactly that. That's what we spoke about before, about they think there's shares, but they've got they can't find any evidence of it. And for some estates now, like with solicitors that I'm dealing with, can you do a 12A search without a broker? I think you can do a 12A through a registry. It's not the easiest thing, but I think you can do it without a broker, but you can't do a blind search without a broker. So any of the name searches at the registry, you need to have a PID, which is a participant identification number, and that's exclusive with stockbrokers. So you could probably employ the broker to do those things on alone, but you can't do the blind search on your own.
Yeah, and that just again, just sharing for the broad range of people that we have listening, knowing the details of the asset holdings are really important for some states in Australia when you do your probate application. So obviously in Queensland, we're heathens up here. We do whatever we want. You don't need to give any details of the assets. But when you do in, say, New South Wales, just our sister state, and a lot of other states, you've got to give a detail of those. So that's interesting to know that, you can do a blind search to give some detail in the application. And then, then you can do your 12A SRN search once you've got your grant of probate.
Yeah, it's a really tricky one because no one can, it's not just us, but you just can't open that account without the probate. And sometimes they just really need a number for that. So in my experience, the best way around that is to lean on the weaknesses at the registries. And so normally they won't give you a value. So in the cases where they're really desperate for at least a rough value, I'll do that method of continually ringing. So I might ring them once a day, and over the space of a week, you'll eventually get someone that'll give you the hint. But yeah, sometimes they won't tell you anything at all, and other times they'll tell you a bit more. So we kind of lean on that a little bit.
Yeah. Camille said again, registries are so difficult without SRNs. It's probably worth having a broker. I totally agree. What we learn about here in the art of estate planning is that we're all supported by other professionals. So do what you're good at and then outsource the rest. So
yeah, it'll be a lot quicker. It's a lot easier. And in most cases, there's not a difference in the cost. So I'm not sure whether people charge, their rate for dealing with registries, but in terms of the brokerage arms, the registries have their own brokerage arm as well. So even if you do go through them, you're still going through a broker of some sort. Particularly in those smaller parcels, the cost is going to be very comparable to going through the registry, just with a lot less paperwork and headache.
Yeah, that's great.
I said that before, sorry, just suggesting that when you do a transfer to the beneficiaries, transferring to a HIN as opposed to an SRN, I just believe it's just so much safer, and it's just so much tidier for the future estate administration. So it's a little bit of forward thinking. Like I said, it doesn't cost anything. There's no ongoing fees to be on a HIN, and you've then got yourself an advisor that's going to look at it. So I don't know if every broker would do that, but most of your full service stockbrokers would open a HIN and open an account on behalf of someone like that to transfer them in.
Yeah, I think estate planning is all about reducing the white noise for people. If something happens, it's the people that are left behind that you want to try and limit what they have to do. And so if that's something we can proactively work with their financial team to do, then, if that's appropriate as well, then yeah, it sounds like a good idea to think about it.
Definitely. And then the final one's just in that unpaid dividend again. There's a few things here. So once the registry is notified of the death, so I know a lot of solicitors will actually, at the time of them being notified, they'll then write a letter to the registries. So the period from which they receive that letter to when you do finally sell or transfer the shares, that bank account would then be inactive. So it gets turned off at the point of them receiving the letter. So any dividends between notification and the sale, which can be a while by the time you wait for probate and you get it all sorted and get the documents back and forward and all that sort of thing, can be a number of months. So there might be 1, 2, 3 dividends that have happened in that time. All of those will be sitting there unpaid, waiting for instruction. So it's important to make sure you check that. I've got an example of Computershare here. They're all pretty similar. You'll find that there's it's either called activity or payments, and then you can go through and see where they've been paid to and whether they're paid or whether they've been rejected or on pause. It's just a little extra step. Most of the deceased estate specialty stockbrokers will do this on your behalf anyway. There is some really good specialty brokers out there in this space, but there's also, it's one of those things where nearly everyone will put it in their services as an added service. So there is the specialty ones, and then there's the others that just sort of add it on as an extra add-on. So maybe something to ask in that initial call with your broker, whoever you choose, is just a quick checklist of what comes with the processes, what do we need to ask for, and what comes automatically. So
you think that would be logical, wouldn't you, that they would just do that? But yeah, it also doesn't surprise me that it's not. So
yeah, it's just one of those things. It's super time consuming to be like ringing the registries, checking all this sort of stuff. So I think people are just going and get the sale. That's the quick, easy activity to do, and then ignore the rest. And I know with some of the clients that we then go back to with the unpaid dividends, because it is. It's a one document for every single dividend. And so I've had cases where there's been 43 PDFs that need to be signed, and you can't do DocuSign with the ASX yet. Hopefully that changes, but no DocuSign. So you've got to go and send the 43 documents to them, hope that they sign them all correct. They've got to then scan and send them back to you. So it is painful. And I've had, for people who've got a couple of $100 in there, that's like, I just couldn't be bothered to do it. And so it can be tricky to convince them to get that done. So we'll try and check that before we send out the paperwork. And then when we do we set up the estate account, we'll try and send that all at once, so that hopefully the client's just got to do one lot of signing, and then the rest can happen after that.
Okay. We've got a question here, John, from Camille. Can a deceased have more than one HIN, so HIN, like more
Definitely.
than one broker, or is it only one issued for that particular person, or is it separate joint parties like husband and wife? Or
no, they can have as many as they like. I could set up 6 HINs for you today. It's so it'll definitely give you a collation of their shares, but if they've gone to different brokers, someone might have a CommSec account, which is like a DIY broker, and then they decide they want a full service stockbroker, so they might have some shares at CommSec on one HIN. They open up an account with a broker like myself. They got another HIN. Then they open up a kids account. There's another HIN. They might have, some different strategies that they put into a different account. So you can have a lot of HINs, and it's very common for someone to have more than one. And that's where a name search would come in handy. So you do the blind search. We can go on and if we locate one shareholding on that HIN, it's a lot easier to then find the rest on it. So we could do a name search and discover 6 HINs, and then we'll do the HIN search to find what's on each of those.
Yeah. I'm pretty allergic to numbers as a solicitor. I don't maths and geography are my Achilles heel. So again, probably one of those reasons why you get someone else involved.
The second part of that question is it only issued for that particular person or separate for a joint party? So if the account is in two names, there's one HIN for that joint account. And yeah, it's basically one HIN per account at that stockbroker.
Yeah.
And you can move those. So you might find that on your records, there'll be say it's a Bell Potter portfolio statement. You might ring Bell Potter and they say, we've got no shareholdings under that name. Like you can move HIN. So they might have swapped to JM Investments or CommSec at some point in time. So that the piece of paper's right and the HIN's right, but the location of those shares has just changed.
Great. I think that's the last of the tips, John. Is that right? If my terrible maths is right?
That's the last of the tips.
Yeah.
Any comments on deregistered shares?
I think we've got one more question, and I've got some quick ones to throw at you.
Juicy ones. Cool. Deregistered shares. Yeah, if they're still out there, then you'll have to go through the process of the deregistered shares. That's probably something that I would not recommend tackling on your own. It's hard even for us to go down that path. So there may be an opportunity for you to get something out of those, but generally speaking, they're deregistered. The money's already been sorted out. So they may have been paid out for those shares, or it may just be a zero value holding. But in some cases, like I've got a few clients at the moment, they just get dividends come in the mail. The shares aren't actually listed on the stock exchange, but they hold them and they sit on their HIN. So there's a whole other way that you got to go and try and sell those shares. They're not usually worth a lot.
Yeah, great question, Teresa. So John, I've got some questions because this is, again, the reason why I invited you is that it's a bit of a passion project of mine, having been personally thwarted by share registries. And also just, I think that, again, while we do love working with other financial planners and brokers, often a lot of the estates that we get don't have someone, and having, a pile of questions myself, I'm assuming someone else would be. A couple of questions from a practical perspective. Do you as a stockbroker work directly with clients, or do you have to go through a planner, or is it both? Or
Yep, you can work directly with a stockbroker. So I'm registered to operate under personal and general advice, but everything that I try and keep all my clients under general advice, which is essentially we stick to the investing side of the service. Yep. But yeah, I work directly with clients. The two major parts of my business are deceased estates, but also then the investments, which is helping people to invest in the stock market.
That's great. That probably rolls nicely onto my second part of that. I know that when you deal with some advisory groups, there's kind of a threshold level they require to actually invest with you, because it's a lot of work to get someone on board and talk about things. And so quite often I find they set, you've got to have at least this many dollars to invest to make it worth our time. Is that something that, I know it's common in the industry, but is it something that's for you that you need to do, for example, for a deceased estate work or for just any general investment work?
We can help with any size deceased estate. So we've got a minimum charge. So a simple case, the minimum charge is $150 plus GST. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, the shareholding might be worth $100, but you've got to get rid of it to clean that estate up. So sometimes it might be a cost to do so, but you can still tidy that up. There's also ways where you can actually donate those small shareholdings to charity. So you can access that as well. It's not super easy, but so the minimum there is just more around a dollar minimum, not around the size of the estate. So we'll help with any situation there. And then from a client point of view, then I've got clients that will start with zero, and we come up with that plan so that they can start the savings plan, which leads into the investing plan, and over time, then they can get into the market. So there's no real minimum. The ASX have a minimum of $500. Anyone that's in that really small end of investing, where they want to invest a few $100s, I'll still give them, they can book in for the free call, and I'll give them advice on how to go and do it themselves, because it's not really worth having a full service stockbroker. It doesn't really make sense to pay the fees on a full service stockbroker. But generally speaking, if someone's investing, in $5,000 lots, then it's worthwhile to get that advisor on.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's depends on the scale of the operation too. Like obviously as a small business, you can be a bit more dynamic in the way that you're providing services. When you've got those bigger firms that have staff and stuff coming out their nose, you can understand why they have those certain limits.
Yeah.
In terms of, getting the actual search done, and I rang John about this week because it came up. I know now from your presentation that in order to do a 12A SRN search, you need to have a grant of administration, so a grant of probate. In order to do a general search, though, so the blind search, can that be done by anybody? For example, a beneficiary that doesn't believe that the estate has captured all the shares?
Yeah, so we would need to get documentation. The best way to do that through the beneficiary would be through someone like yourself. So we do it through you, and then you can give us the documentation to show that they are who they are. So we'd need to see potentially the will or the probate, whatever's available.
Yeah.
In terms of the SRN search, so sorry, it would be the solicitor, the executor, and the beneficiary would be basically who can request those things.
Okay. Yeah.
And then in the SRN search, yeah, so we need a probate to be able to set up the account in the estate. If it's a small estate, then we can set it up without a probate, and we do a small estate indemnity. So we can do one of those two options depending on the size of the shareholding in question. And then for an individual, like if you're not an estate but you've got missing shares, then obviously you don't need to wait for probate. You can just set up an account and do that search that way. So you would do the search first before you set up the account to double check that the shares definitely exist. Once they exist, we'd set up the account, do the 12A, and then you can sell the shares or just know where they are, basically.
Yeah, that's great. Now, my next two questions, I'm sort of going to merge into one, having spoken about a couple of them lightly during the presentation itself. But I think you've already mentioned about what sort of information you kind of need to do a blind search. I think you were saying just different sort of variations of addresses and that sort of thing. Is that right?
Yeah, so we have to put our detective hats on, and we've got to check every single name combination. So if it's a couple, that might be in one of their names each, it might be in a joint name. The clients that sometimes they call themselves by their middle name, and sometimes the first name doesn't get used personally, and so half their documentation has their full name, half it's got their second name as first. Sometimes they might have a middle name where they just use the first letter of the middle name. So essentially that initial fact find with me would be around trying to work out, of all the documents that you do have, even if they're not share related, what are they listed on that envelope? So what are the different combos we can try? Are they a doctor? Those sorts of things. Anything that might give us an extra clue to search at the registry. The doctor one can sometimes be a big help. So then we'll go to the registry, and we need all of their old addresses as well, because the shares could be registered to anywhere that they've lived in the last, in their lifetime, basically. Yeah. And then just from a personal compliance level, then we need proof to know that they have the access to be able to search the shares. So the executor or the beneficiary would need some supporting documents there. Yeah. And then we contact each of the registries. I do it at least 2 times. The $1 million case that we spoke about earlier in the session, it was $1 million worth of shares. It's actually referred to me by someone in this group, which was nice. And they had absolutely no idea about these shares at all. They just knew that person had spoken about holding shares. It took 4 calls to that particular registry before we found something. So 3 calls, we did the name search, we tried every combination, repeated myself to make sure that they'd heard the spelling of the name right, and found nothing. And it was just because we're speaking to the solicitor and the beneficiary was so adamant that there's got to be something out there that we continued to try. And on the 4th phone call, we found this huge holding of shares. So it's
I'd make 4 phone calls for $1 million. I don't know if
Great find. So it is that detective work, and sometimes it can be something like, obviously deal with a lot of rural clients, and the property can have a name like the Vale or something along those lines. So that sometimes it can be as that little bit extra of knowing what the property name is or the building name is, just to get that name search through. But we do a bit of detective work. We go back and forward at each of the registries. just to see if we can find anything. And from there, you'll get a very loose idea of what it is. So if they do their job right at the registry, then you'll normally get the name of the shareholding and the shares, and that's it. You won't have the amount of shares, the value, or any of the other information yet. Sometimes I'll give you a bit more and tell you the size of the holding, or they might give you a ballpark of it's between this value and this value, so you can get a bit of a rough idea, but just depends on who you get at the registry.
Yeah. Again, a constant problem we have with banks as well, particularly when trying to provide an asset and liability list for an estate. So, and I suppose that probably leads me to the last point here. What sort of detail comes up when you do a search? Is it uniform what information you get, or is it depending on the particular registry as to what sort of information you get about this when you do a search?
So the one thing that they will definitely give you, actually, I'll take back the definitely, because I have spoken to people who don't give it to you, and I'm like, what do I do next? I don't know what you're meant to expect. But the one thing that they should give you is what's called the line by line, and that is a line by line name and address holding of that particular share. So, because something like a comma out of place, whether there's a comma there or not, or a space or whatever it is, and that each individual line, so sometimes the postcode's on the 4th line, sometimes it's on its own on the 5th line, sometimes there's a 5th and 6th line that's empty, and then the 7th line will have the postcode. So they'll give you what's called a line by line, and it's essentially the salutation, the name, the address spelt
and
exactly.
If any of that's wrong, it doesn't show up properly.
It'll bounce, and then I've got to do the 40-minute phone call back to the registry to try and work out what we've done wrong.
Wow. That just makes me angry.
Yeah, you need a lot of patience in this game. So yeah, the line by line is the one thing that they will give you. And annoyingly, sometimes they'll make you guess. You got to guess. So sometimes they won't actually verbalize it to you. You have to say, is it Miss Gary Payne? No. So then you got to try and guess your way through the lines to get it right. So, but that's the main thing. That's what we need. We need the line by line, and then the share itself. So whether it's Suncorp or Telstra, whatever it is, they're the sort of two main bits of details we can do. And from there, we can then take that information and go and do the 12A once the account's set up.
Beautiful.
And the reason the account needs to be set up is that we need to make sure you're who you are. We do all the identity checks, all the anti-money laundering checks, and the fraud checks and those sorts of things.
No, absolutely. Yeah, we're all aware of the regulatory stuff that now goes around. So, yes. John, I'm just aware of our time. I know a lot of people like to stick to our time because they're often doing this in lunch breaks, that sort of thing. And while I know we have started late, I won't punish those that have to head back to work for my tech issue. Thank you so much for chatting with us today. I really appreciate it and sharing your knowledge. I encourage anybody that comes across anything like this to pick up the phone and ring Jono. I think the price he's quoted is quite competitive, but certainly the situation is working all together in this process because no person is an island, as we mentioned before. So if you have any questions, feel free to take them offline to Jono, send them through to us. We'll make sure that he gets them if you forget to write down the information here. Jono is a part of the group now. I encouraged him to join and see. I think I encouraged you when you were already in the group or something like that.
I'm already in there, so yeah.
He's already part of our family. So feel free to throw some questions at him. And we look forward to hearing any of your success stories of working with Jono and other brokers.
I actually saw Rahani's name in the comments before, and I think it was Rahani who invited me into the group initially. So thank you, Rahani. Thank you, Tara, and thank you, Carrie.
No worries. Have a really great day, everybody, and we'll see you next month.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.